Well, hello and welcome to today's Alpha Anywhere demo and Q&A webcast. I'm Dave McCormick, Vice President of Product Management here at Alpha Software. I'm pleased to be joined by Dion McCormick, no relation, our Lead Solutions Engineer here at Alpha. Today, Dion will be going over a demonstration of some of Alpha's capabilities, but more importantly, he'll be here to answer your questions. So go ahead and type those questions in now into the questions box of the GoToWebinar control panel. So let's get started. Dion, are you there?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me okay?
I sure can, thanks.
Good. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. I'm going to make you the presenter, so you should see it.
Excellent. Awesome. There we go.
And there's your screen. It's coming through.
Oh, I know. Sorry, I hope that's not too jarring as the first screen. You're like, I don't want to scare everybody off. Anyway, well, welcome everybody. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us for the weekly Q&A webinar. This is about you. Help us help you. Take the time to go into the question area of the GoToWebinar control panel. Let us know if you can't see that. We've been having, I think things are starting to settle down as far as the control panel, but again, help us help you by going to the questions area, type in your questions there, and when you have done that, then we will be reviewing them and trying to answer as many as possible. And we also encourage you to take the time to send us ahead of time. Go ahead and email any of your questions to guides, G-U-I-D-E-S, at alphasoftware.com, and Dave will diligently and with great care monitor that and make sure we get that into our schedule. In fact, we had a great one that came in this week. Actually, this week's quick demonstration kind of review, and it'll actually be a two-parter, came from a client who was curious about a methodology for doing auditing and audit trails and how do you handle all that. So we're going to talk about that this week and next week. And then we also got a great one in, which I can't wait to put together, was a real-world example of WebSockets. WebSockets is a relatively new technology put into Alpha that dramatically increases the functionality of, say, communicating among different people using different browsers and stuff like that in terms of updating without putting a lot of undue stress on the Alpha application server. So we've got these great ones. Those are due to these fabulous people putting in questions for us. So take the time to send those questions to guides at alphasoftware.com, and we'll make sure we get that in the loop. So I am going to go over that auditing in a few moments, but I want to make a couple other announcements. Again, there's a great video that was done by Selwyn Ravens about a week and a half ago on the new 4.2 release items. And those items happen to do with two areas. One is improved HTML reporting, meaning using the freeform reporting to put out HTML compliant reports, which is awesome for mobile solutions, and a fabulous discussion of video recording in your disconnected applications, which is super powerful, which will extend the function and capability of yours. So if you get a chance, that video is now available. If you go to our video library, that is up there and available, and you can view that, which I really think it's worthwhile to do so. And remind you is that our weekly Q&A will be posted on our the library, so it takes a couple days for us to wrap everything out, get rid of all the bad words I've said, and post it to there. So we want to make sure we have a quality, clean product for everybody who works with us over.
It's a lot of editing is done, especially when stuff goes wrong, and you start using that language. We've talked to you about that.
And this is all I slip Dave to say, hey, can you edit this part, make me look better? I give him a 20 spot. Sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less, and it always looking shining good just because of Dave and the team there. It's kind of like, think of Oompa Loompas back up there in Boston, working hard to make everything look good. So again, make sure to, if you miss anything, there's some great ones that happened the last couple of weeks, and if you happen to miss each week, feel free to go on and watch them. We'll have them there, and I think you'll really enjoy them. So today, I have one other announcement. And again, we've been talking about this, but it's super important, is take the time to go to alphasoftware.com. We have the DevCon 2006 signups filling up fast, and we have an incredible slate of of speakers and demonstrations and training sessions, really focused around getting you up to speed. We have the training that's available the day before, which is on the mobile optimized forms, and we're really excited about that. You know, as I have dove more into that, you know, there's just, once you understand, and I always call it someone's brain, once you understand how to approach and how Alpha approaches something, then it just makes great sense and you can just rock and roll. And that's one thing that we'll be focusing on is not only what can the capability do, but more importantly is how do you approach it to kind of there. And we're going to do it in a very step-by-step fashion where you really don't have to have a lot of experience, even with mobile development. And by the end of the day, you're going to be able to develop very powerful mobile solutions that you wouldn't be able to do on any other platform. And more importantly is you'll have sort of the context for how the pieces move together, because there's often multiple pieces that come together and it's a matter of, well, how do they work together? How do you approach it? We're really focusing on not only the mechanics of what to do, but also how do the pieces fit together. So you have that context and then you'll be able to rock and roll after you head from the training and be able to build on those basic skills to really develop world-class mobile interfaces. And it's just super fun, really enjoying putting that together. And you can go to the training section, sign up there, and we'll be doing that the day before, and you're really going to enjoy it there. So that's on the Alpha DevCon 2016, coming up quick, only a couple months away. Pretty crazy there, pretty crazy. So with that, we are going to have Q&A, dun dun dun. But what I'd like to talk about, and we've gotten a number of requests over the last few months on this, and let me go here and put up my little thing there, is the concept of audit or logging trails. A lot of people say, hey, well, you know, I'm building a system. It's important for me to understand what's going on with that system, but more importantly, to monitor who's using the system and how it's being used and activities that are going on, etc. Is there any sort of standard way, is there any built-in methodologies within Alpha that allow me to do that? And so I've created a little presentation, and it's a two-parter to talk about that. And, you know, from a terminology, people say audit trail, audit logging, transaction log, security log, error log, system log. I mean, there's many different ways. But basically, it is the following, and this is kind of an audit trail or audit log is a security relevant chronological record, meaning we do it in time, set of records or destination source of records that provide evidence of a sequence of activities. So basically it's like just tracking what happened in the system. And this is the nice technical way of it, but it's very important to be able to do that, especially when you look at different requirements for different industries. And we actually do a lot of work in the medical area, and I'm sure a number of people here, since we have a very well-educated crew online, is the HIPAA compliance standards. This is the Patient Privacy Act, and it requires systems that handle patient record information to have certain security and privacy settings, but a key part of that also is history tracking of who saw what, when, where, and who changed what, when, and where. And so this is very important for certain industries, and we're seeing that more and more, and also very important in this day and age where a lot of computer systems are really at risk out there. Who's accessing that data? Have you been hacked? I mean, if you don't have a historical audit trail, you really can't tell what went on in the history. So this is becoming more and more important, so I wanted to spend some time today talking about the built-in capabilities, and then also talk next week a little bit more about how you can manually build your own into your sort of your product logic or into your UXs and forms and grids and things like that. So today we're going to focus on Alpha's natural, out-of-the-box, built-in logging capabilities. And there's actually a pretty extensive level of capability that's kind of hidden in there that a lot of people may not be aware of. And then next week I'm going to talk a little bit more about how you can actually add standard ways. And again, these are not the only ways to do this, but they're ways I've come across talking to other people. So I hope that should work out really well. So let me do a quick process check. Dave, make sure my visual and audio is coming through okay.
It's coming through.
Great, great. So let me go ahead and I'm going to pop over into my Alpha development environment here. And let me go ahead and open up a different one here because I have a security. And I wanted to show you a couple switches first that are very important from a audit logging, security logging standpoint. And so this is another solution, and I'm going to go up here. And for people who are new, this is the Alpha Anywhere development environment. I am on the Web Projects Control Panel, which is where you access anything involved with your web projects. There's a really powerful button up here called Web Security, which controls all your web security elements. There's a number of different subsettings, the basics, which I'll show in a few moments, but things like setting up users and group, page security, utilities, publishing, etc. But I'm going to go ahead and select Web Security Configuration there and click OK. Now in here, if you haven't enabled it, this will be disabled, but you'll see there's a whole number of different settings, like where are you getting the data, where's the login page, a whole bunch of different options. But the one I'd like to show you, if I go to login options here, actually it's, where is that? Where did I put that? Security, sorry, oh, there it is, right there. I'm sorry, it was on login options. It's the third item down. You're going to see a very powerful, simple to use feature called Login Activity File. And if you enable that, it actually gives you a set of other changes here. First, it asks you where it's going to save the information. This could be the project target folder, the data folder, or you could even create your own function to take this information and do what you want to do with it. You can also say, you know, should I include the failed logins? Should I include logout activities? Should I include password change activities? So built into the security system right out of the gate is a log file, which will allow you to log all the people who are logging into your system, date, time, and location. And I'm going to go up in the server and show you where you find this information, etc. But that's a really powerful, easy to use, low cost, i.e. it's built in. You don't have to do any more coding, and it will start creating that. The key thing you want to look at is where do you want to do it. I usually set it to project target folder. So basically, and this is up to you, but this will just basically put that log right into the folder where you're published on the server. So it's available right there. But you may want to do it in other locations, and you can set that up. So maybe you want to centralize all your, let's say you had 4 or 5 applications running on the same server. You may want to do something along those lines. But this is your first one. So what I highly recommend, it again costs nothing. And the nice thing is you immediately get a login activity trail and logout trail. So at very least you can see if you're under attack, because notice you can track login activity include fail. You could be sitting on there and it's going to track the information if someone's trying to hammer your system to try to get in there. So at the very least you can detect that someone is attacking your system and attempting to power into your system using the login activity. And again, the way you access that, to show you real quick, is in your application, you go to the Web Projects Control Panel, go to Web Security. The first option here is the Web Security Configuration. Click OK. Go to Login Options, third one down, Login Activity File. Enable that, and then you can set the different parameters of how you want it to behave, and that'll set up a login activity file on your server. Very powerful, very easy to use, and essentially from a programming standpoint, costs you nothing. So it's a really good one there. So that is you know, a first step towards setting up some audit trail activity on your application. And again, notice this is on an application basis. So there are maybe an application where you really don't care. It's just a test one. You don't give a, you know, you just want to put it up there and call it a day. But if you have any serious applications, that would be your first login activity that I would suggest that you put on and put into the system. Now, there's some other ones, and so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pop out to actually go to the server. So that's on the development environment, and when it publishes it, it sets some switches on the server, and it'll start doing that. But what I'd like to do now is I'm going to pop in, and I'm going to use my remote desktop capability, and I'm going to pop up to my Giant Killer Demo server, which is hosted with our wonderful friends at ZebraHost. Note, I pay for this, so I plug them whether or not I'm getting stuff for free, because they are awesome and they really know their stuff, and it's very easy. So check out ZebraHost. But I'm up on my ZebraHost environment there, and what I'm going to do is, again, this is a Windows Server situation. In the lower right-hand corner, you'll see an icon for Alpha Anywhere. Now, don't freak out. You'll notice it's got a little red button right there. Well, the trick is, when I set up my servers, I use what's called Always Up, and it runs my application server as an administrator in the background for me. So as you can see, my app server is actually running, and that's a whole other topic of how to run app servers is there. But the cool thing is Zebra takes care of setting all that up for me. But what I do is I went ahead and launched, and I have a inactive version of it here. It's just like if you're using Always Up, you can just go in and launch the Alpha 5 application server. It will give you this icon, because what I need to do is I'm going to right-click on that and click on Configure Server. So again, if I have down here my icon, and normally if you're just running it without Always Up, you'll see a little green dot right there showing it's activated. So I'm going to right-click on that and go to Configure Server. And so now I'm in the server dashboard. This is where I control everything about my server. What port I'm using, what is the document root, my server license here, my details, etc. And you'll see there's a tab here called Logging. And this is very, very powerful. Now normally it's disabled, but you can enable server logging, and now, which is really, really powerful, is you have a whole suite of different ways to log information. So we have an access log that's available. That is, it sort of goes along with the other one, that login log there. We also have a powerful one called a server error log, which when there is an error on the server of any kind, it's going to trap that. And that's really powerful when something's just not happening right. It's always good just to go on and see if the server's throwing errors, because sometimes it's some back-end code that really doesn't show up in the user interface. Something just doesn't function. But what's cool is that if it's actually a true error in XBasic or in the server, it's going to spit that data out there, so it gives you at least a pointer to understand where the problem is occurring. And then we have a trace log folder, which also traces the activity of what's going on there. You have some control over this. For instance, you can say rotate these things daily so that you don't get one massive log file that's going to consume all your memory. You could also rotate it by size, where you say once I get to a certain size, I want to rotate that into a new file. You also have the ability to do raw HTTP logging. I don't do a lot of that, but if you want to see the raw HTTP code that's going back and forth from your server, you can do that. And then also this XBasic error log, which I really like, and that's really what I was talking about in terms of being able to do that from that standpoint. So these are settings you make on your server. Once they're set up, you can control, they have defaulted locations, but you can always change the location to where that is served. So you can put it anywhere on your server. And the nice thing is that they've got these nice, easy-used buttons, but the reality is that they're on your server. So they're actually just text files on your server that you can access through FTP. So if you wanted to look at these, you don't literally have to come in here. You could just have FTP and go into that folder and be able to serve it. But let's look at one of these. I think let's start right down here to the XBasic error log. So I'm going to go ahead and click Open Log. And sure enough, I had some interesting stuff in there. And this was in a recent testing. So I like this one because it gives you an example of it. So as you can see that there was a warning that an illegal session variable value was used. And I can tell you what's going on right there. And this has kind of happened, things that shifted is, and this is kind of a point for everybody, is that I used to name my session variables as session.category.this. And the session variable doesn't really like that anymore. It used to like it, I think, in V11, early V12, but it doesn't like it. So I've changed those all now to be underbars to do it. But you'll notice that this would never show up in your user interface. This is a kind of under the covers guts kind of problem. So by looking on this, I can say, oh, you know what, I am using that. And so I can go in there and you can see it gives me not only the warning, but also a little background on it. And it tells you where it's coming from there, etc., and all the information, etc. Like in this is another one, drop delete is a function of mine. It's saying you can't find that, and all those. So a lot of really interesting information, including the execution stack, which kind of shows you where it's being called. And again, all this helps in terms of you tracking down and correcting those errors and being able to build that. And it also gives you a little information in terms of, you know, this is because I've been playing with on my latest pre-builds for the upcoming training. But this notice is saying that this has been built on a new version of AlphaLayers than on the server. So this is saving in this case, and that's, by the way, the cardinal rule. So don't hold me to it. But you always want your server and your desktop to be there. So that's an example of a really, really powerful logging capability. So let me go ahead and open the access log. And as you can see, you'll notice that I'm getting access information. This is a lot more detailed information, but it's actually giving me the information of people doing gets to certain folders and other pieces there. And so this is a specific product I was working on, and it's doing those pieces here. And you'll notice that it's telling me what IP address it's from. So I can start seeing if I'm under like a denial of service attack, or if someone's trying to hack into my system. That's all available from that standpoint. And again, they're doing these things on a daily basis, so you can see them over time. Let me go ahead and open the server error log. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, so this is telling me a little bit more about service. So I honestly haven't looked at this, everybody, so I'm going to go ahead and look on there. So I don't have a robots.txt file, so I can go in and search that. But this gives me basically visibility into what is going on my server, which I normally don't have access to, meaning that I'll never be able to see that just working within my system there. So the first step towards gaining audit log traceability, error trapping, etc., is to enable your security login in your app using what I showed a few minutes ago, and then going to your server and going to the logging tab here and enable the server logging and set up and enable these logs here. And you can play with them in terms of what you like, what you don't like. You can turn them on, watch them for a while. But as you can see, there's a pretty extensive level of capability built into the server, which really, again, you just have to enable it, and it's available for you to go in and handle those things from that standpoint there. And trust me, there are times when this really saves your bacon, because things just don't seem to work right and you're not sure. I always pop in and look at it and say, oh, I missed something, or I made an adjustment that screwed something else up. It just gives you that data that you can then trace down to where the actual problem is at. And a way you address that, by the way, is on your server, you right-click on the little icon here and down in this area here, and you go to Configure Server. It'll open up the Application Server dashboard. You'll notice I have a bunch of different tabs here. You go to the logging, and then you can enable server logging and adjust that, rotate it. You could even tell it to put it in different locations. That's up to you there. And that's really where it's at right there, is logging. And you don't really pay a huge penalty for performance on it. I haven't seen any problems with that. So definitely something to have enabled. So just to give you a little bit more hints and a little more capabilities on how to do that. Now, that is the alpha built-in logging functionality. But that kind of gives you, like, if there's an error or how people are accessing it, whether they log in, log out. But some people want to have more extensive transactional trails. They want to basically be able to say, listen, when someone submits a UX to, like, if someone fills out a UX component, a form, and they submit that to the system, I want to be able to trap what data fields have changed, who the person did it, and what date and time they did it at, and store that. So if I ever have to go back in and find out who's mucking with my data, I can go in and quickly be able to find that. And there's really two methods that I've found. One is you can either save that to a file, or you can save that to a database. And it's really up to you in terms of what you want to do between the two, really, in terms of your personal preferences. So next week what I'm going to do is spend a little time showing you some sample code in terms of how you can add that to a UX or add that to a grid, and in that add that extra kind of step, finalization step that will save this data out to either a file or to the database. And really not very hard. There's one little trick that really makes it easy to kind of figure out what changed, etc., and I'll go ahead and show you an example of that next time. But that is a quick introduction, and that's one thing, Dave, mark that to change that because it sounds like I'm an idiot, so if you don't mind.
All right, I'll
you can dub that in, like,
Mark. Yep.
And what I'd love is do it like with a robot voice, so like when you get to that point, just put the robot voice over with the right pronunciation. You go
I was
from there.
thinking of beeping it out as if you had said something inappropriate.
Oh yeah, that's even better. Then it kind of hooks their interest. They're like, oh, what did you just say? Wait a minute, I'm going to go back and look at that again. So that's an introduction to audit trail functionality within Alpha. Again, we have some built-in functionality there. Next week I'll talk a little bit more about how you can put your own piece in there and write your own logging routines and add them to it. What's nice is once you've set it up, anytime you change your system, you can just apply the same strategy and be able to keep your system up to date in terms of audit trail functionality. That said, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back to Dave, and he's probably got 1,000 questions in the Q&A web portion, so we'll hand it off to him. But again, thank you to a loyal listener who suggested we talk about this subject. We love that. Keep that coming, and I'll give it back to Dave.
Excellent. So let's get right in with a real coding example one. And this person has written in saying that they have a list component, I think they mean a list control, that's linked to a SQL table, and they want to be able to delete a record by clicking on a button in that list. So maybe at the end of that list, they want to have a delete button, and when they click the delete button, they want it to do two things. First of all, issue the delete statement to SQL Server, and the second thing is to make that item disappear from the list.
Okay.
Can you do it?
Yes. And if you're using a list component, and I'm going to go back into my development environment that which we just talked about a few moments ago. So let me go ahead and open up my demonstration folder here. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and go in and create a component here. And what I'm going to do is create a UX component, which is our form. And what the individual is talking about is a specific type of control that would be part of a UX component. Okay, so I'm just going to pick a blank one because I don't really care about look and feel and things like that. So I'm at my UX builder, and I like to point out that there's some really nice videos that introduce you to how to use this built into the system. You just click there, it takes you out to that along with some other information if you're doing disconnected. So I'm going to go ahead and go into controls. I'm going to go down here to data controls because a list component is a data control. So I'm going to click list, and I'm going to go list customers. Now, I could go ahead and manually put this together, but it's very simple for me to actually just click list control quick setup genie. So I'm going to go ahead and up to this connection string. I'm going to select my connection string. So what it's asking me first, where am I getting my data? In this case, a connection string to a SQL database. What am I getting? I'm getting my fields from my table. And so now it's asking me, well, great, you want them from a table, which table? And the nice thing is since I've told it which connection string, I click here and it gets a list of quotes. And this is the Northwind database, so I'll just click customers. Click right there. Now that I've done that, it's asking me for a field list, so it's saying, great, I'm connected to the database, I know what table you want it from. I'm going to go ahead and click here, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to select all of these because I want to be able to display them at any point in the future. So now I've told it where I'm getting my data from, what specific data, i.e. table, and what fields from there. And I can do filter in there. Now the really cool thing about this is that you could have a detail view, and I'm going to go ahead and enable that because that way it's just in there ready to go. And you'll notice a very important and powerful way here it says detail view buttons. And I'm going to show you two ways to handle this so you have an information on that. So I'm going to say detail view buttons right there. And I'm not going to worry about disconnected operation for right now. I'm just going to keep it as assuming it's a connected one for right now, although it works basically the same between the two of them. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and open this. I'm going to go in, and so now I have that. So I'm going to go ahead and go here. Ooh, I don't want to fill the container actually. What I want to do to make this a little more readable, I'm going to go to my list layout, and all I want to do is show the customer ID and the company name. And I want to do one thing that I know is that I'm going to create a container around here, insert around, and that way they'll sit side by side. So let's go, we'll call this list delete record underscore UX. Okay. So now I have a list in here. You'll notice that the system automatically created the list for me. It's connected it to the database. You'll notice also it put together this container that had all the fields, but check it out. Very important down here, you'll notice that it added some buttons, and one of the most important one here is delete records. So now I can go into my working preview. You'll see that here is my list on the left, and it just basically brought back everything. On the right is my detail view. So if I click on something, it automatically identifies what ID this is, and it puts in this field right here, and so it allows me to edit it. And this is fully editable, so I can go in here and go 1, 2, 3, click save, and it saves it, etc., and I synchronize it back. I guess I did enable the disconnected those things. Now, What I'd like to do now is I'm going to go down here and I want to take this one right here, and notice I have a special button here called delete record. It's going to give me a confirmation, and now it's deleted. Now, in this case, since I'm disconnected, it is showing a purple right there. So before I go into synchronization, what I'd like to do is this. So I'm going to go back into my customers because I want to make this immediate in terms of how it works. So I'm going to go into list customers, and this is where I control all the behaviors behind what data I get this list of. I've got a detail view right here, and I've got also other things like what's the list layout, etc. So I'm going to go to detail view, and I want to show you a really powerful little feature in here called Synchronization Policy. So it's on the detail view here. So the idea is I have a list, and then I have a detail view here that actually shows me the record I'm editing or working on at any time. So I'm going to go into Synchronization Policy, and you'll notice right now that it's got a lot of text. So I'm not going to walk you through it here, but check this one out here. Perform client-to-server synchronization whenever user saves edits in a row in a list. So the cool thing about this is that you can say boom, and it will immediately try to talk to the server. So this is, instead of doing like a disconnected wait till I synchronize, I can actually say, hey, when you do this, immediately synchronize it at that point in time. So now if this works correctly based on my experience, and let me go ahead and save this and go back into working preview. Now, if I go down here and I select this and I say delete record, you'll notice something. Check that out. It didn't just say, hey, mark this for deletion and delete it during the next synchronization. It actually literally made the change when I saved it. And same thing, if I go up here and I change this region code and I click save, watch what happens. You'll notice that it didn't, notice it auto-synchronized the moment I clicked on that. And again, that's nice, and let me go back and show that setting for you, is that then you're not worried about synchronization and everything else, it's handling that for you. And again, you go to detail view, synchronization policy, and this. And you can read more of the detail, and it says basically the edits are automatically pushed back to the server if the internet connection is available. And therefore you don't explicitly need to hit a sync button there. Pretty cool. Pretty neat and very handy in terms of that there. But one thing I wanted to show you is now I have the behavior the person was talking about. What I want to be able to do is I want to be able to select a record and hit delete and have it immediately, and you can get rid of this confirmation code. You don't have to have that. It's up to you. Always good when you're deleting information there. And you'll notice it goes there. Now, let's go ahead and look on what's going on behind the scenes here. So if I go to delete record right here, I can go in here and you'll notice that this is the JavaScript that's occurring when I delete this record. So what it's doing is, and I'll walk you through this step by step, the first thing it's doing is just getting a pointer, an object pointer to the list control. So you'll notice I have this thing called list of customers. And so what it's doing is saying, hey, do me a favor, grab a pointer to this list of customers. So it takes this and says, okay, this little JavaScript command, this is built into Alpha, will give a pointer to JavaScript for that. And then what it does is then once I have that pointer to that object, which in this case is the list, the object itself, which is the list, has a whole bunch of built-in functions, and one is called delete row. And so what it's going to do is whatever row has been selected, when I call this little command, it gets a pointer to it, and then it tells the list, it says, hey list, whatever row is selected, I want you to go ahead and delete that. And if it's disconnected and I haven't set up that synchronization pod, it will mark the record for deletion. But since I have that synchronization, now the cool thing about that is I can just copy this. And one thing I wanted to show you about is that after it performs this delete row, it automatically does a refresh of the list, so it gets rid of the list in there. So now what I can do is I can go up here and say, you know what, I really want another button up here. And, I want to put a button up at the very top of the screen. I want that button to be delete me if you dare. And I'm going to scroll down here off this button, go to my click event here. You'll notice I'm in Action JavaScript, but I'm going to go to text mode. I'm going to paste that in, and I'm going to click Save. And now, when I go in here, and I don't even have to have a detail view. I can just have that record right here. And so I go down here, And if I've done this correctly, it's going to delete that and say yes and fire it all up and all those pieces there and off to the races there. So that's how you would do that. Now, a little technique I use is that Alpha tends to build a lot of the functionality for you. So for instance, when I created this, I said I wanted a detail view. So it automatically created these fields, the buttons, and everything else. So one of the tricks is if you don't really have an idea of how to perform something, but you go, you know, it kind of works when you just use one of the templates, have it built, and then you can go behind the scenes here, click on a button, and look and see what happens. So if you'll notice something very similar, it grabs a pointer to our list of customers, and then it runs a little command that's built into that list. In this case, update list from controls. I could go to new record, click here, same thing, it grabs it, and then it goes new detail view record. So all of this allows you to kind of behind the scenes kind of see what code is being generated, and then you can copy and paste that code to whatever new buttons or whatever you happen to want from that point. So that's a quick dirty. I hope that solves your immediate issue of being able to do a deletion of an item in a list and have that list automatically refresh there. It can work both offline and online. But all I really did was kind of create a standard one and then do a sneak peek behind the scenes as to how Alpha set it up to run that command. And then I was able to extract that JSON and put that onto any other button or graphic or whatever I would like so choose to have that show in my interface. Doesn't even have to be on the same, could be on a different panel. You never know. It's really up to you on how you want to go do that.
Okay, great. So you showed the delete button in the detail view, and you showed how to add a delete button above the list, but could you show how to add a delete button on each row of the list?
Okay, so let's go ahead and look at how that goes. I'm going to give this a try. I'm going to go ahead and copy this command, okay? Okay, so now what I want to do is I'm going to go into my list of customers here. And when I specified my data source, it automatically built the fields that come from the data source. So this is all automatically done for me. But you'll notice on the fields down here to add item, I can click there and I could add a bunch of different stuff here. So I could add a hyperlink, custom control, ink, etc. But in this case, I'm going to click button. And I'm going to call this delete. Now I have this delete button here. And notice here, but I haven't added it to my list layout. So if I were to run this, I'm not going to see that delete button yet. So the thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to that delete button, and you'll notice something on here is that you have a on-click event here on that delete button. So after I added the item, I selected the item, and then I have on-click here. So I'm going to double-click on there, and guess what it shows? My JavaScript editor. So I pasted in there this, and I'll see if this works. I'm kind of running, we'll see how this works. But I pasted this in there. So now when I click on this button, and it's going to run that little JavaScript, and off to the races I'll go. So I go in and look at it. You're going to see something. It's like, oh, wait, where'd that button go? Well, we created the button. It's there. It's just not shown. So we're going to go back into list of customers. I'm going to go to list layout, and now I'm going to go here, and I'm going to take this button, and I'm going to add it to my columns in my list. And I'm going to click OK. So now, when I go into the work preview, you'll notice now I have a button on each one of them, and let's see if it works. There we go. Voila. So basically all I did was kind of take this code and add a button, and this could be a graphic, it could be anything you want on it to represent it, and you could even make it, you know, show and hide, and you got a lot of those capabilities. But what I really did was all I did is go into my list of customers, went to my Fields tab, added an item, in this case a button, could be an image or a hyperlink, etc. On that button, I grabbed and put my little tricky JavaScript code that allows you to delete a row to the on-click event, and then I went to the list layout and added that button. So maybe I want it to the beginning of it or the end of it or wherever I happen to go. Then once I have that, I saved it. Now I have my working. You'll see that I've got my records, I've got my button, and if I were to click this button right here, it just runs that action JavaScript, or I'm sorry, that JavaScript that performs it as if I clicked it here, over here on the detail view, or up here on this other button that I created.
Excellent. Well done, Dan.
I think that hopefully answered it.
All right. Well, we are very, very light on questions today.
Ah,
I know it's a
disappointed.
holiday week for a lot of people. A lot of people didn't make it.
Mm-hmm.
But I do have another question for you at least. So in the meantime, though, if you guys have questions, please type them into the questions box. This question has to do back with logging, which is something you showed at the very beginning.
Oh,
And
yes.
the question is, when you're using a load balancer and you have multiple instances of the Alpha server, can you get them to all point to the same log files, or do they need to point to different log files?
And I'm going to have to say, I don't know. I think they're different files because I think each server is going to kind of save to its own file. So just I'm 95% sure that's how it goes. Now, that brings up a very interesting point. We can find that out and determine that. But my guess is it's really meant as this, one file for one server. In the IIS world, I'd be very interested on that. Maybe there's some functionality in the IIS plugin that allows you to write to the IIS logs that is a little more flexible. So what I would suggest is check out the IIS documentation, and this gives me an opportunity to do this. Go to, is it documentation at
you can go to documentation.alphasoftware.com or alphasoftware.com/documentation.
Okay, so I'm going to documentation.alphasoftware.com. Oops, I must have miswrote it. Oh, it could be good if I actually spelled software. Okay, and then I can go up here and go IIS. You can find all these pieces here, but I like to just cheat, go IIS, and there's the IIS, that always goes main, I was there, I'm sorry, go here. And this talks all about IIS, and you may want to look in there to see if that may provide in a load balancing scenario. I think IIS is going to be a better fit, but it may have some built-in capability. I just don't know off the top of my head, but we can check that out. But this is a great, again, this is our documentation site. The team has been spending an enormous amount of time to getting everything localized and centralized and put in one place, and it's really coming together.
Terrific. I'm taking a look here through more questions, although I don't see any, so go ahead and get them answered. Here's a good one. What's the best way to filter records in a list control by the user that's logged in? In other words, they have a session variable with a GUID field. Is there a better way to do it than using the GUID field, or what's your suggestion on that?
Again, my assumption is you're saving that GUID field into a session variable. And then what you can do is in here on the data source, I can go into my SQL statement here, and I can go to filter here, and I can actually put in here that filter. So I would say, if I'm filtering, like I only want to see that person, only see the records that are associated with, maybe it's their, employee ID is equal to session dot employee ID. And when the person logs in, I store their employee ID in a session variable, so then that's available within the filtering aspect, and it will resolve that when it runs to say, okay, session there. One of the challenges when you're in working preview, session variables don't exist, so that's a little bit of the challenge there, but it allows you to dynamically put in and be able to do that there. It's pretty handy on that standpoint from those there. So again, what I do is I basically put it in the SQL statement, the filter, to look at that session variable, which I set when the person logged into the system.
That is great.
And by the way, just a quick note on that. I've noticed some people will use the user ID, meaning they'll say, it's like I'm Joe at megacorp.com. I always have a concern with that, and I always tend to suggest that, and for my systems, that any kind of tracking is done using the person's unique ID. Not the unique ID that's in the Alpha web security system, but a unique ID you create for that person whenever you create that user, because you'll have Alpha security, and then you're going to have another table that's going to collect like their first name, last name, what department, etc. there. And the reason I do that is that people's user IDs will change. Especially if they're not inside your company, they could change an email and they want to log in with a new email, which will be their new user ID. Well, if you've stored their email and the original user ID among all of your tables, then whenever you change that, you have to go through and update all that information. But the way I do it is I store the person's ID, and therefore what happens is if they ever change their user ID, I don't care, because when they log in, it's going to say, oh, yeah, you're Joe, okay. Here is your, you're going to have the same user ID, even if same ID, unique ID versus user ID. So I've noticed some people use user IDs to sort of store that information, and the downside of that is that if that person ever needs to change that user ID, you have to have a routine to go in and update all the records that they've touched so that it maintains integrity of your data. So that's just 2 cents. And it sounds like the person that asked the question has already put that in place, so good job, way to go, and we'll go from there.
Great. Well, that brings up another question. That is, when you do this in a grid, typically, instead of just using the session variable, you might use an argument for that.
Yes.
Argument the same way?
Let me see. I get on lists. I think, let's see, properties, filter. Now let's see. I'd have to double check that. I've always just used session in here. Yes, you can. I'm sorry. Yes. That is the better way to go, and I apologize. It does resolve the session, but to answer that, what I would do is I'd go into the arguments. So you'll notice I open the list control here, and then it's got the first thing right here is arguments. And again, kind of scratch last 4 minutes in terms of session, but go into, and I can say, okay, employee ID. So I'm creating an argument, which is going to be essentially kind of a variable that gets populated, and it's going to be numeric. There, okay? And I want to set the argument to the value of a page, session, or cookie variable. So now what I do over here is I can say, okay, I've got this. Now it's asking me, well, where am I going to get this? So I click on there, and it's going to ask me what variable. And what I want to do is I want to get it from session.employee ID. Okay. So what's going to happen is it's going to take whatever the session variable employee ID is, session.employee ID, and it's going to put it into this argument. So that happens behind the scenes automatically, whatever I happen to do that. Now what I do is I go to my SQL statement here, I go to the filter, and I can say employee ID is equal to, and in here I can either put a literal value, but I can also insert the argument. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, it's type C. Oh, yeah, it thinks that employee ID is type C. So let me just go back here. It should be a type in, but this I'm just going to say it's character just for giggles here. Okay, and then go back in here, go to my filter. Again, what I want to do is I want to say employee. I can also select it from this list right here. Do I have an employee ID? No, I just kind of made it up, so I'm just going to type it in. But you would select it from there as equal to, and then you select the value, and you say insert argument. And then now you'll notice that how it builds it is says this field name is equal to, and then it's got a colon employee ID. And then what happens is when this runs, it's going to grab that session variable here and put that in there. Now, I have to double check is that if you're running disconnected, session variables, you're not connected to the server. Session variables live on the server. So I'd have to double check, and I'll look for that and find out for next week so we can discuss that. But this is how it basically passes in the session variable, and then it filters it based on that session variable. And so when this runs, it will then filter it by whatever criteria. And that could be like department, division, whatever it happens to be for that particular company or that particular service. So thank you. Yeah, I mean, arguments is a better way to go. You basically create your argument, you tell it's going to be populated from a session variable, and then you use that in your filter statement. I'll double check on when you're disconnected on a list. The list may, usually what happens is I'm filtering that list ahead of time, but if you want to do filtering on the list itself when it's disconnected, that's a little different animal. But one thing that's nice about this is that if I set this up, and this is a disconnected list, so if this property of this list is a persist data to local data storage, when this runs, it will actually take that session variable, because it does need to talk to the server, and it's going to run this query and filter it, so the only data that goes down on the local device is going to be whatever matches that filter. So that's really powerful, because instead of bringing down your complete database onto your local device in a list, you can use these filters to say, you know what, they're only going to be looking at customers in this region. So what I want to do is find out what region they are, put that in a session variable, and then when they sync this list up, it's only going to download to that list things that are in that region. And you want to be very judicious on that, because really want to use that, because the less amount of data on the mobile device, the faster it operates. Even though you can put an enormous amount of data on there, it's always good just to be prudent and say, let's just give them the minimum of what they need to do when they're out in the field. So for instance, it's a service tech. What you can do is just filter it and only give them their calls they're going to do that day. That's the only data they need. They may not need history information per se. It's really a judgment call on it. But I definitely use the filtering a lot to limit the amount of data that goes onto the mobile device to make things faster, smaller, more reliable, etc.
Excellent. And although no one has asked, someone always does tend to ask, why would you use argument instead of just using the session variable? It seems like you're setting the session variable, then you're setting an argument to that session variable. Why not just skip the argument altogether? What's the
Arguments is the preferred way, because arguments prevent against things like SQL injection. Now again, you're controlling all that, so that's less of a danger. Mm-hmm. But also, you can get the argument doesn't necessarily have to be a session variable. It could be a cookie that you put on, like a web browser or a page variable. It could be
something that's manipulated by the visitor, and if the visitor was malicious, then they could start putting in GUID equals, and then they can put in a long string of SQL commands and break your data.
And then possibly get access to data. So yeah, it is definitely preferred to use arguments. It is kind of interesting where you're setting this, then moving it from there. But just it's recommended. They highly recommend that you move towards that. Again, you could use session, and it will resolve that properly. It's smart enough to do that. But we tend to say use arguments.
Terrific. So here is another just sort of unrelated question. This one has to do with maps. Not Google Maps, this time OpenLayers. I don't know if you're familiar with OpenLayers, but it is a open source JavaScript project that's free that lets you do all kinds of mapping using JavaScript. And the question was really simple, which was, does Alpha Anywhere work with a system like that?
And the answer is yes. The only downside is you have to kind of you have to include the JavaScript library and write the JavaScript code yourself. The development team has already built, pre-packaged essentially the Google Map capability. So for instance, we have Action JavaScript that allows you to do mapping there. Again, there's no limitation for you to use that, and there's some great examples on there. But I would anticipate you would be including the JavaScript library and then having writing the JavaScript yourself. And if you're going down that road, you're probably sophisticated already in terms of JavaScript is not scary or those pieces, and usually it's not very difficult to put together. Actually, with Alpha 2, you can write direct JavaScript against Google Maps. So if we haven't thought of something to put in the system, you're able to do that yourself, because you can just take, since it's just the JavaScript library from Google, you can do that. And I can see why people use OpenLayer. There may be a question, well, why would you do that if it's all built in? Because Google Maps has certain limitations. You can only do so many calls per day, and then once you're above that, you need to get a business license, which is like $10,000 or some lot of money.
It is in that range, right? And also for applications that are gated, in other words, you need a username and password to get through them. If your mapping capabilities are on the other side of the gated page, according to their license, you do need to get a paid license for that as well.
Yeah.
There is one other change that I'd like to point out, which came up last week, where
good.
Google made a change to the way Google Maps work. It used to be that you could call in anonymously and get your map data back. As of last week, and they announced it the day they made the change, which is never fun, you need an API key. So in other words, if you do not have signed up for, it's a free API key, but if you need an API key from Google, in order to make that work, and Alpha Anywhere in the latest release now has a ability for you to key in that API key, and that's listed in the notes. Now, if you say, hey, you know, it's still working for me, I don't know what you're talking about this API key. As it turns out, they have grandfathered in servers that had currently been using, yeah, there's the setting right there. They're grandfathered in servers that had been using Google Maps without the API key, but if you start setting up a new system on a new server and they don't recognize the IP address, it's not going to let you in with the API key.
Interesting, yeah, because I've been doing demos the last couple of days, haven't had any problems, so I must have a certain level of grandfathering.
You've been grandfathered, but don't expect that to last. So just keep that in mind when you do a deployment. It's you'll actually get an error. It'll tell you right away what the problem is. But that's what's going on. And the latest version of Alpha now lets you supply that key. So I just want to let you know. There's also let's see, the documentation, which is about to change. Oh, I was given a page to that. We do have that in our documentation. So if you do a search in our documentation on Google Map key error, you will find that. A couple people are asking.
There's always something.
A couple people are asking about Bootstrap. Have we done a webinar yet on Bootstrap? We haven't.
We haven't, but guess what's coming up at the developers convention?
It is indeed. We are doing on that. Yeah. So that's it. For those of you who don't know what Bootstrap is, it's a series of templates that you can buy rather inexpensively for stylizing websites, web applications, and now mobile applications as well. So if you are not yourself a terrific designer, you can use the talents of people who have already created templates for you. You can buy them. Often they're very inexpensive, $15 to $20. Or if you want to have exclusive rights to it, sometimes it's maybe $1,000. But it's often much less money than what you would otherwise pay to hire a graphic artist to stylize your application. So we will be covering that at the users at the DevCon coming up in September. Let's see if we have anything else here. I think that is about it. It's pretty light on questions. I've also noticed that quite a few people did not get invites. They emailed guys at alphasoftware.com and said, hey, I signed up, but I didn't get an invite. So I've been personally mailing back the invitations.
Yeah.
I've since contacted, during this session, I have contacted the people at Citrix to say, okay, what's going on here? Way too many people didn't get invites, so there might be a mess up on their system. But
And do remember, it just could be you. You know, there's a reason you didn't get that invite.
That's right. You asked too many dumb
Not always a
questions
technical
time, right?
glitch. Just kidding. Just kidding.
Here's a great question. We've only got 3 minutes, but maybe you can begin to answer this one, and it has to do with custom keyboards. Are there custom keyboards in Alpha Anywhere? What can you do with Alpha Anywhere if you want to have a custom keyboard?
Oh, interesting. I don't know of any custom keyboard. Now, we'll be talking about this DevCon, but you can create your own little keyboards kind of in HTML and CSS for like very specific needs for like when you're doing tablet optimized forms. Like you could have like a number keypad or a very, something that matches, say, a controller, But as far as a custom keyboard that's part of the operating system, I'm not sure. I haven't come across that.
Yeah, not yet, but I think you're in the right direction with that. If you take a look at editor sets and editors as part of the form view control, which is all documented, although mostly in videos, it does show you how to put together some things like that, and I think that would be a great session for a future webinar, is to show how to.
Well, that we're going to go over that in the DevCon, so we'll we're prepping for that.
Exactly,
but yeah,
it's going to be there. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, but the neat thing is that gives you infinite flexibility. Like again, we had an interesting client recently where they wanted the keypad to be shown on the screen to be identical to the one that's on their machine, because the operator knows how that keypad works. And they could basically, mimic in terms of recording data. It was just very comfortable. It was just, it's a numeric control.
I see. They had special buttons on the keyboard they were used to. Is that kind of thing?
Exactly. It was like on the side of their machine. And they said, man, we could just mimic that same keyboard in an editor. And therefore, there's zero retraining in terms of understanding how that keyboard, what the different commands do. And so it was really neat. It was neat. It was almost like they took a real life keyboard and brought it into the virtual world.
Excellent. Well, we have 1 minute, and someone is asking for how do you get to those videos about form view control and things like that. Can you show them real quick?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, you can go into the Alpha Anywhere development environment, and there's one right here, which is the video finder. If you open it up, you can then search through all the videos that are in there. You can also go to alphasoftware.com, and I think you can shortcut it, but you can go to Resources Video Library right here. Again, that's under Resources Video Library. And then in a moment, you'll see that it's video-library is the actual link. It opens up our video library with all those, including the weekly Q&A, and it's just a little slow because of my screen sharing. And in here, you can then just click here and then say, editor, and search for anything, and it will do actually a real-time search against all of them there and show you, different ways to do that. Let's see.
There's
tablet. Here you go.
Excellent. Yep.
Yep. So.
Introduction to the form view control. There you go. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
That would be where I would start.
So again, you find that at Resources Video Library, and you can also, there's a large number that you can access from right within the Alpha development environment.
Great. And for these sessions, I think still the best place to get them, videos.alphasoftware.com.
Oh, let me go ahead and type that up here.
You know what, I will email, I'll put that in the chat window for those of you who have a chat window. Chat.
Look, I'm right back there.
Yeah, well, videos.alphasoftware.com/ and then it's VAM grid, sort of our older system, which oddly is the one that's most updated before it's put into our newer and prettier system. So I'm actually going to give you a link to that in a second. And the link is here. Oops. The link is coming right up.
Dun 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 dun.
If you have a chat window, click on it. If your version of the GoToWebinar control panel doesn't have a chat window, which some of them don't for some reason, send an email over to guides, guides@alphasoftware.com, and I'll send that link over to you. It is the latest. I don't know if you want to click on that on your screen. It should be in your chat window there. And there you go.
Yeah.
And this one we got up to date. So if you typed in, for example, QA, I think even Q&A would work. I don't think it's sensitive to special characters. Or editor is a great one. Yep. No, that one's not working.
You like tablet. I notice a lot of stuff is under tablet.
Okay.
Yeah, like optimized form. There you go. Custom keyboard. And then you can just play it right off there, open up Fiddler,
yep,
and show you how you can create your own custom
keyboard. If you guys get stuck looking for a resource, don't spin your wheels. Just send an email over to guides, guides@alphasoftware.com. Or if you go to our documentation system, on every single page there is a link at the bottom in which you can ask us a question and say, I'm looking for some information and I don't see it. We're happy to point you in the right direction. That email is monitored by a team of people here, and we'll get right back to you. So that's it. We're actually 2 minutes over time, but I want to thank everyone who attended here on our holiday weekend, our holiday week. I want to thank you, Dan, for presenting. I want to thank you for asking questions. We hope to see you next week and at future webinars. Take care and goodbye.